Just a bit of housekeeping to start. If anybody wants to send me a question or a suggestion or something that they want me to cover, the email address is raymondbryan@substack.com, and Bryan is spelled with a Y. If you want to donate, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link, and then if you really want to make my day, there's a Bitcoin address. You know what to do. This will be a shorter one. I got a question, which essentially boiled down to how do you do the right thing even if you don't feel like you want to, if the juice is not worth the squeeze at the moment, so to speak. And it's actually a complicated question because it boils down to how do I stay hopeful? How do I maintain hope? And anything that's worth doing will tend to be a long-term project. So doing the right thing, moral and ethical behavior, I'm still a utilitarian. I'm still a consequentialist in the sense that moral and ethical behavior are still the right thing to do because they give you the most benefit for the effort that you're engaged in. So it's sort of like the classic example of, nobody wants to go to work if they can just have all their stuff stolen from them. So you need to have some kind of structure to make it worth it to exist in these long-term projects. And in your own life, that's where hope comes in. The only reason that you exercise instead of sitting around is because you know that in the future, you being in shape will feel better than not being in shape. But in order to want to get in shape, you have to believe that there's a future in which you'll be placed and in shape, and all of the other good habits you can engage in: eating well, saving money, developing skills, professionally developing, etc. And what are the biggest enemies of hope? Well, it tends to be short-term depression, ennui, melancholy. And a lot of it is counterintuitive. The first thing is that we all have ego. We all want to be unique, beautiful snowflakes. And sort of a lot of this comes back to sexual selection in the sense that being unique is a benefit. And if you base your self-worth on uniqueness, your self-worth is tied to whether or not you'll be chosen and desirable. And it really comes down to, if you feel like you're like other people, that admission tends to anonymize you, tends to make you feel like you're less of a prize. And that works against you, because one of the only ways that you get over feeling terrible and inadequate and like you can't do anything and like you can't get out of bed and you have no future and no hope is realizing that every single person experiences that. Even the greatest, most admirable people have the exact same challenges that you have. Like everything that you've ever felt and are feeling essentially is felt by everybody else at all points, in pretty much the same ratios or whatever. We can never really measure these things, but that's not what this discussion is about. So the first thing is actually something of a ego dissolution, where you just have to admit that, yes, this is precisely what everybody else goes through. And that gives you hope because you know that even the greatest people have been able to overcome that particular problem. And there's things too, like it's just getting over perfectionism. Because what perfectionism is it's an anxiety where if you've had a critical inner voice, or if you have people around you that are very critical, you want to make everything absolutely perfect so that there's no way for anyone to actually assail or to criticize you and make you feel bad about yourself. But ultimately, perfectionism, because perfection is unattainable, there's this old saying about, I put a small flaw in everything I do, for perfection is the realm of the creator. It's this reminder that nothing will ever be perfect. And the pursuit of perfection tends to mean inaction. These never get done if I hold them to too high of a standard. And so to recognize that it's an anxiety, and to just remember it's better done than perfect. It's better done than perfect. Now, the other counterintuitive thing is that hope doesn't actually feel good. So yes, you can positive manifestation, or just positive visions, so to speak, where you're thinking about all the great things that could happen and all the rewards you will reap from engaging in these behaviors. That's one aspect, and that's something to very much keep in mind, to not be downtrodden with pessimism. But when it doesn't feel good, so the reason that people don't engage in a lot of shadow work, in facing the worst parts of themselves and having necessary confrontations with relationships and institutions and governments and so on, is because those are stressful. They're stressful in the short term because it's a confrontation, and confrontation is, back in the day, if you were excluded from your tribe or your clan or whatever, that was actually a death sentence. And social rejection activates pain circuits in your brain. Just the same as physical pain. Like, it's really deeply entrenched. Like, people actually do not like conflict, but it is necessary. Now, one thing is to remember that, there's really no getting kicked out of your clan these days, because there's so much freedom and we're so interconnected that you can just find a new one. There's really no reason to not confront actual injustice, because there's always a place to go. There is no freezing, there is no starving. And that's the beauty of the West, is that doesn't happen. That doesn't exist. There's always an opportunity. You have endless potential and ability to reinvent yourself as whoever you want to be. And that is one of those things that we really ought to be very thankful for, that we live in this age. But once you have integrated and you faced your shadow and you've had the necessary conflicts, and you've actually admitted all these things to yourself and have internalized it, then you have a responsibility. And responsibility, when you really feel it, is unavoidable, and it kind of sucks, because it'll push you forward in the same way that, like, a fire pushes you forward. And a lot of people avoid responsibility because it's something that you can't distract yourself from. It's something that you can't avoid, and you can't just watch Netflix or read about the Roman Empire until 4 a.m. in the morning. Like, you can't avoid it. But that is one of the most necessary things to have hope, to be motivated by positivity, but also to understand that if you're squandering opportunity and if you are not living up to your potential, then you're going to feel terrible about it. And that's precisely it, is that you have to remember that hope is not always a good thing, and that pain is actually a necessary motivator in a lot of these, for everything that you have to do. And so the way that manifests is essentially, you have to force yourself into situations where you will have to have a responsibility that you can't avoid. So it starts off small. It's making phone calls and it's obligating yourself to things. I mean, jobs are the first obligation that you can't avoid. And you have these unavoidable responsibilities, and then all that you have to do is just have an attending positive outcome that you attach to those. So you've got both the unavoidable responsibility and the glorious hope of the best life that you could ever possibly live. And that is essentially how you maintain hope, and ergo, how you do the right thing no matter what happens, and to not be tempted. Now, it's always important, of course, to have a good morality, a good system of ethics that actually informs you on what to do in life. And for all the navel-gazing that I'm oh so critical about how to know the right thing, what a good life is, well, first of all, it's just to admit, again, like, what human nature is and what makes human beings happy. And I think that a lot of discussion where people have no idea what makes people happy and what is right, you're obviously avoiding the point. I know that it's very important to read all the classics and whatever, but you know what makes you happy. You know what the right thing to do is. Like, trust your gut, right? And all of these systems, like, there's this thing with human beings where we've always had, well, we're the only animals with choice over our attention for the most part. And so there's always been this problem where, the worst case scenario was you died at 30 and you were toiling in the fields from dawn till dusk. How did you get any moral instruction? How did you know about the right way to live? And it was always presented an archetype. And archetype is essentially just the the distillation of the human experience that's not over-reliant on empiricism. And empiricism, the best way to think about this is like, in the Soviet Union, they had tens of thousands of people collecting data for these economic models that didn't work, and they were absolutely impoverished all the time, and there were shortages. And the greatest piece of economic information, like the thing that was Christmas morning whenever it showed up, was the Sears catalog from the United States. And what you've got is an economic system that relies on the free market, which is essentially the reason that you stick with the free market and spontaneous order is because it's humble. It knows the limits of what you can predict and what you can rely on and what human nature is. And it's this idea of just, it's strange for human beings to do, but to just float on your back and just like let the world turn and do its thing. This trust in spontaneous order and doing the right thing and recognizing the rights of other people and the beautiful coordination of everybody working with each other instead of against, without tyranny. And so when it comes to the modern man and his attention, it is a matter of a return to archetype. You've got limited attention, but an infinite amount of information. And it is finding the systems that account for your own human nature and account for the way human beings have acted since time immemorial. And that is to return to the sort of ecclesiastical idea about there's nothing new under the sun and you are not unique. And you know what makes you happy and you know what the right thing to do is. I mean, it seems too stupid and intuitive, but if something has gone awry, if something doesn't feel right, you know it. And acting on that, that is the way to maintain hope.